Okay, so these are reminders for the term project, and now we can start today's lecture, which is a new lecture. Having finished the hard OR chapter and discussed how OR projects can be approached using the functionalist approach, and having discussed the stages of an OR project now, it seemed to us in the past few years that a refresher short course on costs would also be important, because most of the difficulties that our students, or indeed practicing IE professionals face, is when they try to put numbers, correct numbers, into their models. And most of the quantitative data that we need when constructing models consists of cost data. So costs are all obviously very important to industrial engineering. And I know that you have taken courses on costs and cost accounting and financial accounting. But nevertheless, it is useful to have a review of the cost concepts. Now, the textbook has a very good case example, Champion Galore, it's called. And this case example is also something I would like you to understand thoroughly. Again, in the remainder of the semester, you can face questions about this case, so you should be familiar with the particulars of the case, all the details of the case. So at the end of this short review, we shall also look at the case, but I'm not going to explain all the details of the case study here, although I have included several slides. I will expect you to study the case carefully and discover or identify all the cost concepts that are embedded in that case. Okay? So this lecture is about costs, and well, it's not about time. I forgot to erase that. It's about costs, only costs. We have types of costs, first of all, then costs that are relevant to decision making. We discuss what these are. I have included an examination question that I used some years ago about costs. Now, this examination question has been used last year and the year before also in the problem sessions, but I thought it was better to put it into the lecture itself. And finally, we have the case, the Champion Galore case. Now, if we define costs, you all know what cost is, obviously, but to put it into the proper perspective of this chapter, we define cost as a decrease in wealth that results from committing a resource to a particular use before the benefits are calculated. So it's about committing resources. You understand what we mean by committing. Committing means assigning a resource to some sort of use. When you do that, you have less wealth because you have spent your resource. So that is what we mean by cost. And there are many different classifications of costs, as you already know. For example, explicit costs, implicit costs, tangible costs, intangible costs, accounting costs, economic costs, direct, indirect, fixed, variable, short run, long run, relevant, irrelevant, etc. So you can actually add more classifications. Most of these classifications, well, all of these classifications are binary, either this or that. There could be other types of classifications as well, but I assume that we are all familiar with these, but the ones that I have underlined in red are the ones that we are going to particularly stress in this, or underline in this chapter. Obviously, these partitions, well, a classification is something which partitions a set, which divides a set into a partition. You know what we mean by a partition. Huh? A partition of a set is the set of subsets the union of which becomes the set itself, okay? And each subset is distinct from the others. I mean, they do not overlap, okay? That's what we mean by a partition. Obviously, since they partition the set of all costs, they must necessarily overlap. For example, we can talk about a fixed cost, which is also explicit and which is also an accounting cost and which is irrelevant, perhaps. The same cost can have all these attributes, or an implicit intangible opportunity cost that is relevant, etc. So you understand that these are different points of view of looking at the same cost and calling it under different name, calling it with different names. Now, I'm going to review these quickly. First, the explicit-implicit division. Obviously, the explicit, I think we are familiar with these. An explicit cost is an out-of-pocket cost. When you incur an explicit cost, it means that money changes hands. Money is removed from your pocket to somebody else's pocket. It's an actual transfer of money. Examples, payroll costs. Payroll cost, labor cost is an example of an purchasing cost, etc. Now, implicit costs are costs in which no funds change hand because, but the cost is incurred. The cost is real, but money is not exchanged. Now, examples are depreciation. Depreciation is a concept we are familiar with. This is an example. It says cost of reduced productivity and disruption caused by rescheduling due to an emergency. Suppose that you have a production system and some sort of emergency occurs so that your production process is disrupted, so you have to reschedule this, okay? This causes a cost. I mean, you don't pay maybe any money, but there are delays, there are disruptions, the work is interrupted, etc. So it also is an implicit cost. The social cost of unemployment. This is a nice example for implicit costs, which will not be considered in industrial engineering that much, perhaps, but as an example, it's very nice. Unemployment is a social problem, as we know, and there's a cost associated with that, even though this cost is not incurred by the government by having the government to pay something. Cost of goodwill loss, we are familiar with this. Cost of late delivery. Actually, cost of late delivery usually results in a cost of goodwill loss. You know what goodwill loss, do we? Okay. And there are other examples. So we now know what explicit and implicit costs are. Now, another classification is between fixed and variable, and also between short run and long run costs. Fixed and variable division sometimes is similar to the short and long run division, but they are not the same, okay? This sort of classification is usually, I mean, economists are usually interested in this sort of classification. These are fixed costs, variable costs, and short run and long run costs are economic terminology. Now, we know that a variable cost is a cost which changes. It changes in the short run. In the short run, what causes it to change? The output level. The output level, when it increases, okay, the total variable cost increases. So variable costs change with the output level. And they change in the short run. Fixed costs do not change in the short run with the level of output. Even though you change your level of output or output level, the fixed costs remain the same. That's what we mean by a fixed cost. But in the long run, fixed costs will also change. Fixed costs do not remain fixed in the long run. So this is just, I'm not trying to define all these costs very formally, but I'm trying to remind you of the concepts, the short run and the long run. So if I tell you, if I ask you, for example, in a problem situation, how long is the short run? Is it 2 hours, 1 day, 1 week? Okay, the answer will depend on the time period in which the cost associated with the output level can change. The interval in which the costs increase with the increase in the output level is the short run. This is how we define the short run. What is the long run? Well, long run is how long is the long run? Long run. Is it 1 month, 1 year, whatever? Its length is determined with this criteria, where fixed costs do not change with the output level. That's the long run. Normally, of course, in economics, there are easier ways of explaining this to students. We say that long run is the time in which you can make investments. Okay? In the short run, investments cannot be completed. This is another practical way of differentiating between the short run and the long run. So costs associated with investments are called capital costs. So capital costs will only be incurred, and as a result of which the capacity, production capacity will increase in the long run. So usually long run in OR cases is when your model includes investment variables. If in your mathematical model you don't have decision variables related to investment decisions, then you are talking about the short run. If your model also includes investment variables, then it's the long run. Okay. Then there is the division between direct and indirect costs, and also prime. Well, direct costs are sometimes called prime costs. Indirect costs are sometimes called overhead costs, as you probably know. This division of direct indirect is used mostly by accountants. Okay, this is an accounting concept of classifying costs. So direct costs are directly associated with one product or service. That's how we define a direct cost. And indirect costs are associated with all products and services. A better term, I think, that I like for indirect costs is that they are joint costs. Joint costs. They concern all the products. Now, some comments. This I have already made. Capital or capacity costs are fixed in the short run, but variable in the long run. Okay? In the long run, there are no fixed costs. Fixed costs are all zero in the long run. In the long run, all costs are variable. They change with not only with the output level, but also with output capacity. Okay? In the long run, all costs are variable, and they change simultaneously with the output level and the output capacity, because the output level and the capacity may not be the same. Okay? You can run your production system under capacity, not at full capacity. So level and output capacity. Indirect costs remain fixed over a wide interval of output level, but they will change when output exceeds that interval, obviously. So these are obvious comments for you to remember. I used a lot of true and false questions in past examinations. And this area is a very fertile area to formulate true and false questions. Some of them can be tricky. So please make sure that you, these are the most important concepts for an industrial engineer, probably, cost concepts. Direct costs can be variable or fixed. So you shouldn't think that direct costs are variable and indirect costs are fixed. Often they are. Often direct costs are variable and indirect costs usually are fixed, but not always. For example, when a machine is dedicated to a product, so its fixed depreciation is a cost directly related to the product. then a direct cost can become a fixed cost. Okay? We understand this, right? Normally, when you look at this classification, sometimes people tend to think that direct costs are variable and indirect costs are fixed. But this is not always true. So these are different classifications, as this example indicates. Now, another distinction of costs is that sometimes they are relevant and sometimes irrelevant. What we mean by this, relevant and irrelevant costs are not cost concepts used by accounting or by economists, etc. But these are for decision purposes for us, for operational research. Relevant costs are costs that change as a result of making decisions. When you make a decision, if a cost changes, then that is relevant. What is it relevant to? It is relevant to decision making. So this cost should appear in your mathematical models. It should have an effect on the decision that you take. Irrelevant costs are costs that do not change with the decision, obviously. We have seen an example of irrelevant costs in the LOD case. What's the irrelevant cost in the LOD case? This can be a true and false question, for example. The production cost is irrelevant in the LOD case, because we are already committed to produce so many drums of oil. We are only interested in how to manage the inventories to keep the costs down. But the same quantity is going to be produced. So the production cost will not change as a result of our new inventory policies. Okay? You remember the expression that we differentiated and obtained the economic order quantity formula. At the end of that expression, we had production costs, etc., but they did not take any part in the differentiation in differentiation and obtaining the optimal solution.
Setup cost is a production cost. We change the number of setups.
But what I mean by production costs in this case are raw material costs, etc. Okay. So this means that, for example, that the relevant cost of an activity would change when that activity takes place. So irrelevant, relevant. Now, let's discuss the tangible-intangible division. Tangible in everyday language is something that you can touch. This is tangible, concrete. Tangible means concrete, intangible means abstract, which you cannot see and touch. Something that exists, tangible is ontological, intangible is epistemological, doesn't exist. Okay. Now, implicit costs that are shown in a balance sheet are intangible costs from an accounting point of view. Now, there is a little bit of attention needed here. You have to be careful with this, because intangible costs are used as a term by industrial engineers and also by accountants. And these are both, and there's a difference between these two. So we have intangible costs from an accounting point of view, and we have also intangible costs from an OR point of view. These are slightly different. Now, when accountants talk about intangible costs, these are implicit costs, which are shown in an income statement or in a balance sheet. You know what balance sheet and income statements are. These are often not relevant to industrial engineering or OR decision making. Examples are depreciation. Depreciation is an implicit cost, and it is an implicit cost because money does not change hands. And also, accountants call it an intangible cost, a cost which you cannot touch, which doesn't occur physically. Now, the confusion especially can occur here. You can see their goodwill. This goodwill is a term used by accounting, used in accounting, but it's not the same goodwill that we understand in industrial engineering. When purchase cost exceeds the net value of an asset, for example, a company buys new land, arazi satın alıyor. That's an asset, okay? And the net value of that asset, from the point of view of the company now, is maybe 10,000 liras, but somehow the company had to pay 12,000 for this because there was another competitor, etc. Although the real value of the asset is 10,000, we paid 12. Why did we pay 12,000? Why do you pay 12,000 if the net value is 10,000? Well, because in the future, using it in your operations will appreciate the value of the land. You will need it and you will be able to make money from it. So you consider future cash flows from that asset and pay a value which is over the market value. So this sort of 2,000 lira cost is called a goodwill cost from an economic point of view, from an accounting point of view. It is an intangible and implicit cost. Reserves for bad debts. Now, bad debts, I mean, again, as a company, some people owe you money. Another company owes you money. Okay? You have provided credit, and in the future, this credit will be paid back to you. But sometimes it's possible that the debtor is unable to pay back because his business is has bankrupted or something happened, and these debts do not come back to you, repayments. So these are called bad debts. And these appear in balance sheets as intangible costs, and they are called intangible costs, and they are obviously implicit costs because money does not change hands. A form of, it's an asset value reduction. These are terms from finance that are not too important for us, but of course, generally, these are important concepts and terms for you as IE professionals. It is relatively easy to put an exact figure on the amount of these costs. These intangible costs can be assessed quantitatively. A bad debt is obviously something, a certain amount of money that is not going to come back to you. So the dollar value or the lira values are easily determined. Now let's come to intangible costs from our point of view. There are also implicit, don't forget all these intangible costs are implicit, which are relevant to OR decisions. These are potential future costs or loss of benefits. Now let's look at the example. The example is a goodwill cost. This goodwill cost is completely different from that one up there. The goodwill cost that might result from late deliveries is a relevant intangible cost for OR. This is not the same goodwill cost that accountants record in their books. Depreciation is often not relevant for OR decisions. So it's very difficult to put an exact figure on this type of intangible cost. So the difference between accounting intangible costs and OR intangible costs is this. These are easily determined. These are almost impossible to determine exactly. Just consider, for example, the goodwill cost that a business can incur. You know that because of late deliveries, some of your customers will not be satisfied with your service, and in the future, if these late deliveries occur over and again, and if they recur continuously, if it's a one-time problem, maybe the goodwill cost will be zero, because your customer will tolerate a late delivery if it occurs only once in a while. But if you keep repeating this problem, if this problem keeps repeating, then your customers will switch suppliers and go to another supplier. And this will cause a loss of business for you, and it will cause a loss of future profits. But can you calculate how much that loss is going to be? It's extremely difficult, okay? Very difficult. But it is very real also. Huh? If you cannot compute it, it doesn't mean that it's not important. So that's what we mean by intangible costs. Forget about the intangible costs of accountants. I included just because the term intangible is used in accounting, but it's not the same type of cost that we should be careful about. Okay, so right. Now, this is probably the most important distinction for us, the distinction between accounting costs and economic costs. Now, accounting costs are recorded in balance sheets and income statements. They are either explicit or implicit costs. These are the costs that are recorded in books. What's the significance of their being recorded in books? The significance is that the value that is recorded in the book occurs when the cost occurs. So it's a historical cost. These costs can also be called historical costs. They are book values. Now, economic costs, and the more usual term we use for an economic cost is an opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is the same as an economic cost. Economists use the concept of opportunity cost also it's very important. In all economic analysis, all the costs that are going to be used must be opportunity costs, but economists don't use the term opportunity cost that much. They use the term economic cost, okay? It's the same concept. These are the implicit costs. See, the costs that we are interested in are in general, in OR, are implicit costs. This doesn't mean that the explicit costs are unimportant, but all the costs we are going to use are going to be implicit costs. I'll come back to the explicit cost point in a few minutes. Economic costs or opportunity costs are the implicit cost of a resource calculated as foregone benefits from the best alternative activity that the resource could have been used for. This is a proper definition of an opportunity cost. I'm assuming that we are all familiar with this definition, but I'm reiterating it, and I'll show examples of this in a moment. Now, an opportunity cost can be equal to the explicit accounting cost. Although we regard all opportunity costs as implicit, in some situations they can be exactly equal to the explicit cost. For example, can anybody give me an example for this sort of opportunity cost, which is also equal to the explicit cost, which is also equal to the above accounting or historical cost? Just give me an example of a resource having a cost for which the opportunity cost equals the historical accounting cost, which is explicit. The cost of, for example, no, just the material sort of. Do you think that the cost of this laptop computer, the opportunity cost of this laptop computer is equal to its accounting cost? Probably not. Just think of something more simple. 1 kilogram of sugar, for example. The white sugar that you put in your tea. 1 kilogram of sugar. The cost of 1 kilogram, I don't know how much the price of sugar, maybe it's 2 liras, let's say. So if I put into inventory 1 kilogram of sugar, in the accounting books, the cost associated with this, the historical cost, will be recorded as 2 liras. Okay? Suppose I am using this sugar in my business to produce cookies. I bake cookies and I sell cookies, distribute them all over Ankara. So sugar is a resource for me. So the sugar, 1 kilogram of sugar, will have an opportunity cost for me. If I am going to schedule my production of cookies to maximize my profits, for example, the cost of sugar is a relevant cost. It should appear in my mathematical model. It should appear as an opportunity cost. What's the opportunity cost of 1 kilogram of sugar? It's 2 liras. Because sugar is replaceable, easily replaceable. I mean, when it sits here for a week, its value does not appreciate or depreciate, assuming, of course, that inflation is 0 or something like that, that the market is stable. Huh? So some simple commodities which can be easily replaced at the accounting value, in that case, of course, the opportunity cost will be the same as the accounting cost. And although all opportunity costs are implicit, as I said, they can turn out to be equal to the explicit cost figure. An opportunity cost can be intangible. Obviously, the cost of late deliveries is an example. It's an opportunity cost. It should be included in our models, and they are intangible. Now, let's discuss this concept of opportunity cost in a little more detail. Now, opportunity cost of a resource is the answer to the following question. This question, you should remember this question. When I ask you, for example, what the opportunity cost is, the way to answer this is to ask yourself this question. The question is, what is the highest net additional income that not committing this resource can generate? The answer to this is the opportunity cost. What is the highest net additional income that not committing this resource can generate for me and for the company? This is the question to be answered. Opportunity cost is measured in units. Another comment about opportunity cost is that these are measured in units of our objective function. It can be an explicit objective function that appears in a mathematical model, or it can be an implicit objective function that is sitting here, although I don't have the model yet. The objective function is usually the total cost that you would like to minimize, or it is the total profit or income that you would like to maximize. Now, opportunity cost is determined in units of that objective function. It is a shadow price. The concept of shadow price is exactly the concept of opportunity cost, the same. Opportunity cost of an identically replaceable resource is equal to the replacement cost. For example, cost of cement or cost of sugar, as we have discussed. The opportunity cost, the cost of a resource which is identically replaceable. A kilogram of sugar can easily be replaced by an identical kilogram of sugar. Similarly, cement. Commodities. Commodities are products which do not have properties that reflect their producers. For example, 1 kilogram of steel or iron ore or oil, 1 drum of oil, although of course oil can have different, slight differences in quality depending on where they are coming from. For example, oil from Libya is of the highest grade, but more or less they are equal. So such products are called commodities. Commodities, coffee, for example, is a commodity. The bread, the ordinary bread that we buy for 1 lira or whatever, not the expensive breads, but the ordinary bread is a commodity. You are not concerned about who has baked that bread. It doesn't matter whether this bakery, it's coming from this bakery or that bakery, it's all the same. So such commodities are identically replaceable. Of course, all identically replaceable resources need not be commodities. In those cases, the opportunity cost is the replacement cost, and the replacement cost is actually the accounting cost that accountants record in their books. Now, let's come to the opportunity cost of an item which is not identically replaceable. Then we have difficulties. Opportunity cost of an identically irreplaceable resource is equal to the cost of replacing the resource with less desirable substitutes. Now, let's look at an example that explains this. Let us assume that the resource is an engineer. An engineer is a resource for a company. This engineer, she is very talented. She is an excellent engineer, and you don't have, she is irreplaceable. You can replace her, but you cannot identically replace her because she has certain qualities that other engineers do not have. The opportunity cost assigning such a uniquely talented engineer from project B to project A, for example. You are going to assign her, you are going to move her from B to A, would equal the income lost in B. Because now she will not be working in project B, there will be a loss, foregone cost. If she were to continue working in project B, maybe she would have attained a cost reduction, a very significant cost reduction. But when you move her from that project to another project, the cost reduction that will be attained will be less than she would have been able to attain. All right? So there will be an income loss. Would equal the income lost in B plus the wages of replacing engineers. When you move her from, let's say, project B to A, then of course there will be a deficiency of engineering expertise in that project, and you would have to hire new engineers, a new engineer, which will not be as talented as this one. So the wages that you have to pay to the new engineer, plus the income loss that occurs because of this move, would be the opportunity cost of this engineer. An identically irreplaceable asset. Now, this example you remember from the textbook. This example has been put here by Sinan Kayalıgil last year. I think when we were discussing that sometimes unexpected results can occur when you do not consider the system as a system, using systems thinking. You remember this example that two materials, A and B, were used, raw materials A and B were used to make final products A and B by working them through 8 hours per day production operation. And the costs and the selling prices are given, and the product with a higher margin is the one at the top. The margin is 180 pounds minus 90. And product B, the margin is less, 150 minus 90. So you might be interested in maximizing the number of the more profitable item to produce, which is product A. If you did that, of course, the result did not come out as you expected. Actually, the actual optimal ne yapacağız bunu şimdi? Ha? İnmiyor ki. Ha, şöyle, tamam. Okay, so you remember that example. If we solve this example by a very simple LP model like that, where you maximize the number of products A and B depending on their margins. One has a profit margin of 90, the other one has a profit margin of 60. And this is the amount of labor that A uses up, and this is the amount of labor B uses up, which should not exceed the available amount of 8, and these are the demands, etc. You get an optimal solution like that. As you can see, this is the output provided by the GAMS system. it gives us the objective function value as 420. So that's the profit that we're going to make in this operation. And the variable values are indicated. You produce 2 units of the more profitable item and 4 units of the less profitable item to attain a profit of $420 or pounds. Now these are the equations, and the dual variables are also indicated, as you can see over there. Now, this is not too important, but just ne yapıyor şimdi? O şey araya girdi. Allah'ım yarabbim. Okay. Suppose we change our formulation by reducing the total amount of labor hours from 8 to 7, okay? It is reduced from 8 to 7. We solve the problem again. Now this time, since we have less labor to use, our total profit is reduced from 420,000 pounds to 375,000 pounds, because we have less resources. So what's the opportunity cost of this resource for us? It is exactly measured by the difference it makes in our objective function value. It is 420 minus 375, which comes out as 45. And this is also indicated directly by the solver as the dual variable of this. So this row number 2 is associated with the labor constraint, as you can see. So the dual variable, as I told you before, as I reminded you before, is the Lagrange multiplier, actually, associated with a constraint. The right-hand side of the constraints, when it is increased infinitesimally, the Lagrange multiplier tells us the rate of change in the objective function infinitesimally. You can approximate this if the units are small, like 8 and 1, etc. It comes out as exactly as you can see. So 45 over there is an example of what we mean by an opportunity cost. It is also a shadow price. Dual prices are known as shadow prices, as you know. So the shadow price of 1 hour of labor, which is 45 pounds, is an opportunity cost. Now, going on to the distinction between relevant costs and benefits. Explicit costs are often relevant unless they are sunk costs. If an explicit cost is a sunk cost, it is considered irrelevant to decision making. You know what a sunk cost is. For example, suppose in the LOD case, suppose the LOD project has cost £8,000 already, $8,000 already. Suppose that the LOD project has been initiated, people are working on it to formulate a new inventory management system, and $8,000 have been expended on the project. And it requires a further spending of $30,000 in order to provide benefits. In order to complete the work, you know that you have to spend another $30,000. When you complete the work successfully, the benefits that it will produce by reducing inventory costs will be $35,000. Would you continue or would you stop? Now, if you stop, if you continue, the total costs will have accumulated to 8,000 plus 30,000, which is 38,000, which is greater than the benefit of 35,000. But you should not stop. You should go on. Why? Because the 8,000 is a sunk cost. It is irrelevant. You have already incurred that cost. $8,000 has gone out of your pocket. If you continue, you have to spend 30,000, but you will have a benefit of having 35,000. In the end, you will be in profit by 5,000, so you have to continue. The 8,000 cost is a sunk cost. Sunk cost in this case is easily identified, but in other cases they can be hidden. For example, as depreciation entered for accounting purposes rather than as a wear and tear cost. Well, let me stop here because there's also a distinction between what we call depreciation as understood by accountants. And we often say that depreciation costs are irrelevant in decision making, right? But there is also something we can call wear and tear costs, yıpranma ve eskime maliyeti. Such costs are real costs. They look very like depreciation costs, but there's a distinction, so let's go on with this tomorrow, okay?